Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this month's Facebook Live event from PracticeHub. Thanks very much for joining us. So my name is Anna-Maria Gibb and I'm the Senior Product Manager here at PracticeHub. And part of my role involves ensuring that our PracticeHub policies and procedures that we provide to our customers reflect the ever-changing needs of healthcare practices. So today we have a kind of a 2-for-1 offer because we're going to be talking about 2 policies and procedures today. The first one is around children and parental responsibility. And the second one we'll be talking about is managing patients with guardianship orders. And I think these are 2 really important topics. And I think often people have a lot of questions around how to manage these patients. But as usual, before we look at the policies themselves, let's have a think about some general guidelines when you're developing policies and procedures. Now, I always think that policies and procedures need to be meaningful, they need to be understood, and they need to be able to be easily followed. So when you're developing your policy, you should think about the reason the policy is required and the reasons for its importance as well. And some examples of the reasons why a policy is important can include things like compliance with legislation, with regulations, standards, guidelines, and so on. And a good example of that is privacy, of course. Another reason why a policy might be important is because it relates to patient safety. So infection control, recalls, cold chain management. Another reason for developing a policy is for risk minimisation. So ensuring that risks to the practice, the business, clinical risks and safety risks are all minimised as much as possible. And one of the other reasons I think a policy can be important is for operational excellence. So many of you will have practice missions, visions, philosophies, goals, those sorts of things. And the processes and the roles and responsibilities that you then create out of those can all bring together that concept of operational excellence. And, you know, those sorts of things can promote efficiency and clarity as well to the practice team. So when I think about procedures, we think about the how, who, when these things get done. So who is going to pick up the clinical waste? How are you going to bag the clinical waste? How are you going to transport it, and so on? And so it's important to ensure all the must items are covered. And in many instances, you'll be able to cross-reference, or you should have cross-reference with other policies and procedures. An example of that might be sort of cross-referencing your code of conduct with your privacy policy, with your acceptable use of internet and email, and those sorts of policies. And lastly, one of the key things I think that is really important in policies and procedures is references and resources. And so these other sources of information can provide information that supports the policy and procedure. And examples would be things like articles and case studies, because they make the content more relatable to the reader. And also links to regulations and guidelines. So back to reinforcing why you do what you do, that you've generally stated back in the policy. All right, so moving on to the first of today's policies. Now, while I've been chatting, you've been seeing my PracticeHub dashboard, and this is what a regular user sees. So they're seeing any alerts and tasks that have been assigned to them. They're seeing a message board where we've posted some messages, or as a practice manager, you'd be posting some messages. But let's go over to the manual. Now, our general practice customers or people working in general practice will recognise, I suspect, these headings. They align with the standards for general practice. But regardless of whether or not you're using general practice standards or other standards, you can configure the layout to whatever suits. So our first policy around children and parental responsibility. So as you can see, following my guidelines, we have our policy, we have a procedure, and we have some resources as well. So when it comes to the policy, as it states there, every parent has responsibility for each of their children until the child reaches 18 years of age. And that responsibility is not affected by changes in the parent's relationship. However, of course, I'm sure many of you are aware that courts may make orders about parental responsibilities if the parents can't agree with those arrangements. They may also approve and make consent orders as well in the courts. So some of the things that a parenting order might consider include who the child lives with, how much time they spend with each parent. But from your perspective, probably a key one here, or two key areas, are the allocation of parental responsibility and also any aspect of care, welfare or development of the children. So it's really important, I think, from your perspective, that as a healthcare provider, that you are aware of any of these orders that may be in place for your patients who are under 18 years of age. Now, when it comes to the procedure for that, I think probably the main thing is about awareness and recording that information, ensuring that it's easily accessible to the practice team, so the doctors, the front desk staff, nurses, etc. And also that you regularly review and check with the parent around any changes to those orders as well. So really important, I guess, when you're registering patients to find out if there are any orders that apply. Ideally, place a copy on file so that people have got the details available. And again, as I said, check and regularly review that information and update where required. So I have a question here. If no parenting order exists, is a child over 16 years of age's right to confidentiality and privacy upheld? So I think in the policy here we do mention this, and I think this is again really important to note around the parenting order for a child 16 years and over does not take precedence over the young person's right to confidentiality and privacy as well. And when it comes to some resources, Avant have got a really good fact sheet around this, so children and consent, and there's also a really good article from News GP here. So children and consent that talks about, you know, when can a child provide consent. Most healthcare professionals would be familiar with the Gillett competence and the mature minor concepts. And then this fact sheet talks you through when there are disputes between parents and children and so on. The other article here talks about children and consent for medical treatment. So some really good examples, real life examples, and then some recommendations as well. So this, I guess, reinforces that concept of including these sorts of resources to provide additional background information to your policy and procedure. All right, so let's move along to our other policy, which is the managing patients with guardianship orders. And so again, this is really useful from the point of view of awareness of the practice team that these orders are in place. Just going to make the font a little bit bigger for you. So key things to highlight to you on this policy, that a child's guardian will ordinarily be his or her parents, but there might be circumstances in which someone other than the parent is the legal guardian. I'm just going to backtrack slightly. The procedure with the question, sorry, does the procedure for children and parental responsibilities outline the specific inquiries to be made and to which authorities? This is not covered under that particular policy. I think that sort of is beyond the scope of that particular policy, but there certainly are mandatory reporting requirements which would be important to go and review through things like the APRA website and the Medical Code of Conduct as well. So back to our managing patients with guardianship orders. So as I was saying, normally a child's guardian will be their parents, but in some circumstances it could be someone else who is the legal guardian of the child. Other things that I think are really important is if they do have a legal guardian appointed, a copy of the document giving effect to the appointment should be kept in the patient's file. And that includes things like enduring guardianships as well. They should be reviewed regularly. So I guess it's becoming apparent why we've put these two policies together in the one presentation today is because there is a lot of common ground there between them in terms of how you manage that information in the patient record as well. So other things to highlight in this particular policy is around ensuring the identity of the person attending the appointment with the patient. So I'd suggest if you're already in the routine of using the 3 approved identifiers for the patient, that might be something to consider when you're also identifying that their guardian is the person that's with them as well. And of course, these things do often have end dates or review dates, so it's important for you as the healthcare providers to ensure that you have that information on file as well. If there is any dispute about that, then there's about who is the guardian. A copy of the legal documents should be obtained before you proceed any further. And it is really important that, you know, you have awareness around who is the guardian and what is the scope of the orders that are covered for the patients as well. So looking around again at the procedure aspect of it, when you register patients with the practice, it's probably good to ask if they do have a guardian, and if so, the details of the guardianship orders as well, and record any relevant paperwork and information as well. Now, I know some practices, the doctors prefer to do this, in some cases the front desk do it, but I think the critical part is that somebody does it and that you do have that information on hand as well. Now, you can also see on our sample here that various states have different legislation and guidelines around this information. So we list essentially every state with a link to the information about guardianship. So regardless of where your practice is, it's important that you're familiar with the information that's required for your state as well. And I think, you know, a lot of similarities between the two. So for both cases, children and those with guardianship orders, asking when the patient registers, noting in the patient file, including especially any effective dates, so when they end or review dates, etc., uploading relevant documents, identifying the guardians when they're attending appointments, and just again checking for any updates or changes to those orders as well. All right, so a couple of things just in closing. As you saw, these are a couple of the policy templates in PracticeHub. So we do have a question. Does the guardianship order policy, does it cover supported decision making, or is there another policy for that? Again, a little bit beyond the scope of this particular policy and this presentation, but certainly there are frameworks that are available. And again, I suspect your healthcare professionals will be familiar with those around supported decision making. And I certainly think whatever process you use, it's really important to have that documented so that there is that transparency and consistency in the approach that you have with these things as well. All right, so in wrapping up, just a couple of things to let you know. Next week, we do have a webinar, Thursday next week, 12 o'clock Australian Daylight Savings Time. And that is around leveraging technology for an efficient and compliant practice. We have Gary Smith and myself and a very special presenter as well, who's a highly experienced operations manager for a specialist practice joining us. So I think you'll get some really good information around that, because I know technology is creating a lot of opportunities. I certainly think there should be opportunities for practices as well. We also have an end of year promo at the moment, which is 15 months for the price of 12. So it is a fantastic time to sign up for PracticeHub. And the best way to find out more information about the platform itself and the offer is to go to our website at practicehub.com.au, where you'll find a book a demo button. And I really encourage you to put aside a few minutes of time to go and connect with one of our team who can show you through the platform in a lot more detail as well. So thank you for your time today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.